Hey, how is everybody? I'm going to quit PowerPoint and turn on Keynote. Is that okay with everybody? Let me mic up for a second. And while I mic up here, I'm going to talk to this for half a minute, to this microphone as I put the real microphone on. During the break, I was talking to people about some very interesting topics. Things like, are there any original ideas? Was the original iPhone an original idea, or was it a derivative idea? Just sort of stuff that's captivating and interesting. And it reminded me of a couple things that I've been posting about, which maybe I'll show you guys. Why not? So let me bubble this up while I mic up. So I tend to post a bunch of stuff that I find interesting and compelling about digital product design and the like. And one of the things that I had been thinking about recently was looking at the original iPhone launch and really thinking about all the things that they promised that device to be. I'm trying to find this image. Let me see if I can actually find it. This whole entryway may end up being pointless if I can't find this image. Oh yeah, I got it. Cool. Okay. So, okay, everybody hear me now? Woohoo! I just found this really interesting. Does anybody remember June 2007, Steve Jobs introduces the Apple phone, right, the iPhone? And he said it was three things. It was an iPod, 1,000 songs in your pocket. It was a phone. And when he said those two things, everybody cheered like crazy. Oh my God, a phone! Oh my God, an iPod! And he's like, and it's an internet communicator. And I was like, okay. Like literally, watch the keynote. It's the least amount of applause for internet communicator. And when you look at it, iTunes song download growth just like crushed. No longer growing, falling apart. Nobody buys digital music anymore. And if you look at voice, back in 2006 or 2007, voice has pretty much stayed consistent, which is like nobody makes phone calls. But if you look at this data, I mean, it's just been beyond crazy explosive. And you can actually even argue music has made its way into data through musical streaming services like Spotify and Rdio, and now even Apple Music is in the same boat. And I thought this was a really interesting thing to think about because we look at this as a highly successful product, but at the time it was released, it was supposed to be three things, two things which have essentially gone away or dramatically changed, and the third thing that got the least amount of applause really being this crazy breakaway hit. So I don't know, I kind of nerd out on things like that and other things as well. The other thing that we were talking about is like, are there really any derivative ideas? Or are there any original ideas? Or they're all derivative? And this had popped into my brain not too long ago when I saw the internal guts of the new Mac Pro. If you look at the internal guts of the Mac Pro, this tiny little thing is the computer, and then it's like 99% battery. Quite literally. This is it. That is the entire computer, the hard drive, your RAM, your ROM, your DIMM, your DOM, right? And everything else is battery. And it's the same thing for the Tesla. This little tiny thing, and before they had the dual, that's front and rear wheel drive motors, there was only one tiny little motor in the back, and everything else in here is a battery. That's it. So I think it's a derivative idea. You decide which one's derivative. Okay, during the Q&A, we can talk about things like that. And if you don't mind, every now and then, maybe I'll pull up a slide that shows a picture that can communicate more clearly than I can with words. And that's kind of been a theme for what I do. I think the ability for visuals to communicate and the ability for the thing that people actually see in software has been what I've spent my entire career trying to do, is to create interfaces that explain to people what the purpose of technology was, that humanize that technology in a way that creates some meaning for their lives. And I did this at a number of big companies, at Yahoo and at eBay. I've done this at a couple startups. I've done this as a consultant. But it's always been the same theme. So I don't know if this is design hacking. I kind of push back on the word hacking, right? Like, I don't know, maybe hacking gets you guys all in the door, but I'm not. I'm a design hacker, right? Like a growth hacker, look at me. That's not how I think about what I do. So I want to show you some things we did in my last startup which now in Silicon Valley time are ancient history because they were like last year. So I don't know, 10 months ago, right? Which means they're all obsolete and irrelevant, but still sort of useful to give you a sense of the kinds of things which we did that I thought were designery, or at the very least nerding out on design, if not hacking design. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why we did them, why they were important to us, and some things we learned, some things we did good, and some things that we totally failed on. And so I'll just sort of talk through a couple things we did at the startup, and then we'll open it up to Q&A, because I saw a list this big of questions. So most of our time will be spent there, if that's fair. OK, so the theme around this design hacking or design nerdery, whatever you want to call it, is around multi-device design. And in particular, the things that we explored and the things that we failed on. So, oh, where's my audio? Come on. Can we try that again? Let's crank it. OK, here we go. Let's crank it. Let's try this one more time. All right, we have a different definition of crank it. OK, last chance. All right, I kind of wanted it to shake the room, but hey. So yeah, we had a company that Google acquired back in September, and it was called Polar. And I'll sort of walk you through in 2 seconds what we were trying to do, and then spend the rest of the time nerding out as promised. So Polar was a service that tried to capture real-time opinions from people, right? And we were trying to make it super fast and easy for you to collect feedbacks on any topic. And the way it would work is you could just fire up your mobile device here, and you could ask a question. Like, let's say you are debating which logo to do. So you can just go in here, hit a button, and say, which Netflix logo do you prefer? You can drop in the old one, and then you can go ahead and drop in the new one. And within a couple seconds, you've got this very simple question. And that, of course, we made sure ran on every device. And this is what I mean by multi-device design. Multi-device design to me means the core service or offering that you are providing is accessible on a wide variety of connected devices. Whether it's a tablet or a phablet or a lablop or a tab top or a desktop or a convertible or a hybrid or a ultrabook or I don't know, right? Name the term. This service runs across all of them. And so you can create these questions, ask these questions on any device. And then you can also collect opinions on any device. We made it super easy. So you can just say which Netflix logo, which PayPal logo. And of course, you can do that on any size screen or any size device, whether it's a touch device or mouse device or anything like this. The experience is consistent across the board. So you can ask a question. You can say what you think in terms of response to a question, and you get real-time feedback. So again, across any device, you can literally see these things lighting up in real time. If you go and post a survey on tech logo redesigns, just sit back and watch as people tell you what they think. Let's say you tweet this out or put it on Facebook. People just real-time respond. So that's the service in a nutshell. A lot of stuff behind the hood to make that happen, but you'll notice a theme, which is that we were pretty bullish on this multi-device design aspect. Every part of the experience I showed you, we wanted to make sure that regardless of the piece of glass you had connected to the internet, you could achieve the same core functionality and get the same value out of the service. And part of that is not that rocket science anymore, which is we account for the different types of output. And by output, I mean things like the size of the screen, the aspect ratio of the screen, the resolution of the screen. There's a lot of this stuff now is pretty basic design principles in terms of making an interface responsive to the output capabilities of a screen. You make it fit on a bunch of screens, you make it look good on high res, and you're good to go. So that's cool. But output's only part of the story. I mean, not the easiest part, but it's not the only part. So another thing we really cared about was the input side of the coin. That is, how can we account for the differences in all these devices when it's time to collect information from people, when it's time to let them do things, not just view things. It's certainly one thing from a design perspective to make sure your layout looks nice on a big screen and a small screen. It's another thing to make sure that things are easy and fast and fluid and flexible across all those different kinds of devices. So what do I mean by that? Well, we took a hard look at the mobile experience, and we wanted to make sure that we were designing something in a way that was appropriate for the realities of mobile use, for how human beings interact with the internet on a handheld portable device that's connected to that internet. And my friend Stephen Huber went and did a bunch of really interesting research where he went out into the real world and he looked at how do people hold these devices? What's sort of the relationship of the body to the screen, and what impact does that have on how we make software for those humans with those bodies to use? So he looked and saw, good number of people have essentially this one hand, one thumb kind of mode. Occasionally, when you get to a bigger screen in particular, you may move to a two-handed approach. You kind of have to tip that screen over. And then occasionally you use two hands. This is what we call the crackberry prayer. For any of you familiar? Oh, yeah, no, oh, yeah, I'm listening. Yeah, shut up. Oh, what? Yeah. That sounds good. So he looked at these different modes of using devices, and he found about 50% of the time we're one hand, one thumb. About 36% of the time we need two hands, and 15% of the time we're not paying attention to what you're saying. And he found this with about 1,300 observations of people using mobile devices out in the wild, in their natural environments. Like literally, he's an ethnographer, he's out there in the wild studying this stuff, documenting it, what have you. The more interesting part, though, is when you look at this two-handed use, which I'll sort of shift over here, there was two modes of two-handed use. One was you use a finger, an index finger, and then the other mode was you use your thumb to achieve those gestures. And so for the one hand, or two-handed, but using a thumb, that was 72% of two-handed use. And the other part was only 28% of two-handed use. So what that means, if you add this up with the previous slide, 3/4 of the time people are using one of these devices, they're essentially a thumb. That is the level of specificity, of granularity of input you have from the human. You got their thumb. And to illustrate what this actually means from a much more pragmatic standpoint, I want to show you a video of me stalking a woman on an airplane. Sounds creepy, but here I am behind her, video recording what she's doing. So it's not creepy at all, okay? Okay, so here's me behind this woman, and you can see she's got one hand, one thumb, and she's sort of scrolling through this feed. You can tell it's Facebook because it's blue. And she's flicking with the thumb, and then she's going to tap, tap, tap. She's going to tap, 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 tap. Oh, hell, just go back to scrolling cat photos. And this is fascinating to me for a couple of reasons, because it illustrates what I showed you a second ago, right? Anytime you're trying to look at user insights, the things that you would use to inform design of any sort, whether it's hacking or nerdery or 101, you kind of want to get your handle on what are people doing, right? How does this affect people? And one way of looking at it is quantitatively. Let's collect a bunch of numbers. So Stephen goes out and he says, 75% of people use one thumb on their screen. And you're like, okay, well, that's cool. It gives you one sense of understanding. But the video of me stalking this woman gives you this qualitative sense that you don't get from those raw numbers, right? You literally see her flicking like that, and you see the issue, because what Facebook does is they just put regular links inside the stream, and they're these tiny touch targets that are actually quite hard to hit with a single thumb. And you see the real human impact of that single thumb on the screen and how it affects your design. So I always try to push people to, it's not enough to just have this quantitative data. You can't just A/B test your way to a good design. Oh, button turned red and CTR went up 5%. Right? Better design, done. It's a signal, right? It's a way to inform you, just like Stephen's research is a signal. It informs you. But you don't get that complete picture until you have the qualitative view. And just for the heck of it, I made another little image here, which is totally unrelated, but why not? I'll just jump between things, because you guys have no choice in what I do up here. I was looking at this picture from the Tour de France, and I really hope I have it here. Oh, please let me have it here. Come on. I'm going to have to give up in half a second. Oh, yeah, I got it. Wow, last slide out of 148. Go figure. So, like, somebody posted this image of what happened to the race computers of all the bikers in the Tour de France when there was this massive pileup of like 40 bikes, right? And this, like, they're biking. So you kind of look at that data and you're like, whoa, something bad happened. And then here's the qualitative view, where you literally look at these guys and there's blood running down their, their shorts, they're torn, they don't know where they are because their helmets are cracked. I mean, both things tell you a crash happened. Just like earlier, both things tell you that people are using a thumb to interact with a mobile device. But I think you get a very different experience and you get a very different feel for the situation from the qualitative data as opposed to the quantitative data, if you will. Anywho, sorry about that interlude. We'll come back to the actual slides in a second here. So what did we do with this information, this qualitative and quantitative information? When we designed the mobile experience for Polar, we did something that I thought at the time was a little pushy, maybe a little bit over the top, but we literally made sure the interface worked with one hand, one thumb, and we put a timer next to people when we asked them to do tasks. And we measured how long does it take for you to use a single thumb on the screen to get things done. And then we also really tried to make as much of the interface work as possible in that mode. So I can sort of show you how that works here. So you can tap on the sides of these things to vote. So there you are with that single thumb, and you can say, where would you rather vacation, here or here? And you just sort of scroll up to get more, and you can, there you go. And when you get to the bottom of the list, I think this is going to happen here. When you get to the bottom of the list, you just pull up for more, and that's an opportunity for us to teach you something new. If you want to skip something, just swipe across. So you get this tip from the bottom, and now you can just skip things. And that runs off that same gesture. You just swipe across to skip things, and you're done. But you learn that by pulling up. You can also pull down, and you can see the menu comes back that otherwise is gone, and you can make a change there. And if you continue to, I think this is what's going to happen next. If you continue to drag up, you can see a bear hanging by his underwear. Let's see if you get another bear hanging by his underwear when you pull it up. Come on. Oh, am I going to do it again? Yeah, you can't see the whole thing. But you can kind of pull it down to refresh and all these things. And there's a couple other things. But the point is, all of the core interactions here inside the app just happen like this. Right? They're designed for that reality. As you're pulling up for more stuff, we use that as an opportunity to teach you something. We don't have a separate button that's like, learn more. Or tour, right? Or when you open the app, we give this big overlay that says, when you're finally in the app, remember these 5 things about how it works. There's a quiz later, which is how a lot of these things introduce themselves to you, right? You've never even used the app, and here you have this 5-page test of what's going to happen in it. So we use these natural gestures. And this was very, very effective for us to create these very simple, single fluid gestures of the thumb. The other thing that it turned out to be really good for is as phones got bigger, our ability to put our thumbs places on them got worse. Right? And phones continue to get bigger. The average size of a phone right now is, I believe it's 4.3 inches and rising. I have some charts which I can dig up if you guys are interested to show you how much they're rising. Heck, why not? You mind if I jump between slides like this? Is anybody annoyed? If you're annoyed, speak up now, and I will not listen to you. But we did all this analysis around the size of phones across different devices, the size of phones out there. And let me see what a good way of looking at this is. All right, about to give up because, here you go. So that's actually, this is smartphone viewport sizes, which is a little bit different than what we might talk about, but it's interesting nonetheless. And then, here is the meta global distinction of the average smartphone diagonal size. And basically, you're looking at 4.3 inches is the average, and you can see that this 4 to 4.5 inch line is the strongest. Things go like this. And then if you really want, you can get a breakdown across all the different geographies and that to see where smartphones are biggest and largest, and off you go. But believe me when I say phones are getting bigger. You probably knew that. You don't need data. But anyway, when phones get bigger, it gets harder to hit things up here, which is why people resort to this two-hand gesture to kind of make this more accessible. And as you get bigger, you get more and more ouchie spots. Now, the nice thing about designing for this single thumb is you always have this consistent, comfortable zone at the bottom. And you're actually seeing a lot of applications start to take this into account. If you look at a service like Swarm made by Foursquare, this used to be their primary action up here. And now, in their redesign view, their primary action has come down here in this more comfortable, easy-to-reach area. Anyway, this is the kind of stuff that we were thinking about when we were designing the mobile experience for the Polar app. But since we built everything in a multi-device kind of way, we wanted to make sure that that experience works well across different form factors. So when you started to expand on screen size, meaning you got to a little bit of a bigger screen, we changed the UI up. And what we did is we made this column a bit bigger, but we also introduced this additional layer here where you could quickly flip through the things that were in whatever list you were at and access them. And the reason for this was if you look at how people use these devices, they generally have this sort of holding pattern. And now this thumb allows you to go flick, 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 flick real quick, find the thing you're interested in, and then over here you can engage with it. And we did this deliberately because when you look, I got this data pool from Sentia Mobile. When you look at how people interact with their tablets, what you'll find it's pretty much a 50-50 split. Half the time they're in horizontal mode, half the time they're in portrait mode. And when you design for these form factors, you kind of have to consider both because the orientation can change at any point in time, and people roughly use orientations the same amount. So that was kind of the vertical orientation for a tablet-ish size screen. When you move to a horizontal orientation, we actually changed the UI a bit on you, and we put a bear up here hiding. I don't know why. But then over here, we've got the split again. And this is designed to account for how people interact with devices like a tablet. Quite common for them to have a comfortable grip around the sides of the device. And this is also true for touch-based laptops, which at the time we did a project with Microsoft. This was sort of a focus for them, TBD if anybody cares today. But I don't know about you guys. I often find myself trying to touch my laptop. And I find myself trying to touch my oven. I don't know. If it looks like a screen, right, you think you can touch it. So anyway, we tried to account for this modality. And what I'm getting at here is this is another mode of thinking around software design. And what we've been doing with computers, if you go all the way back to like the punch card era, there's a huge amount of abstraction between the input and output of a software system. Because you had to go and like punch a card. You wrote on like a little programming sheet what you wanted the program to do. You then took that programming sheet, you got a card punched, then you took the card punch and you put the punched card inside the computer, and the computer would do something, spit something out, and then you'd come back. There's like 7 layers of distance between the input and the output from the human to the computer. And then with the mouse, you've still got this layer of abstraction. But with a touch-based interface, the content is the thing you touch. The interactions are direct. It's direct manipulation. And that means the software is now that much closer to the human body. And all of a sudden, things like ergonomics really matter for software design. We have to think about like the average size of the thumb, things like comfortable grip positions, viewing distance of a screen. Because these things are proportional to us. And ultimately, we're not designing for screens, we're designing for human beings, right? So we want to understand a lot about that. Anywho, so we're trying to account for how things lay out in terms of touch, dexterity, and I'll talk about that in a second. But then when we got to an even bigger screen, we found we were losing some of the velocity that we had with touch. On the mobile devices I showed you, you could just sort of go scroll, 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 boom, 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 boom. Super fast, super easy. You could cruise through this stuff. When it came to the desktop, all of a sudden we had this really clunky mouse interface. Right? Just wasn't as nice. So we thought, OK, why don't we create that velocity for people with keyboard? And if we detect that there's a keyboard, what we'll do is we'll bring up this little tip that says, hey, you can just go up, down, left, right, and go up, down, pick a question, left, right, vote on the question. And you get that same velocity back. That'll be awesome, right? And since we didn't want to tell people without a keyboard that they should use keyboard shortcuts because they'd be like, what's going on, we figured we'd only show this for people with a keyboard. Simple enough, right? All we got to do is figure out if they have a keyboard. Or figure out if they have touch. Turns out that's impossible. Like, sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. It just turned out to be a giant frickin' mess. And ultimately, where I have landed, and the advice I would give to all you guys is don't fight the inputs. Just accept every kind of input humanly possible and make your UI work with any input type you can. And I'll illustrate how to do that in a second. But we went and talked to the Chrome team, we went and talked to the Internet Explorer team, like, please, can we do this in a web browser? And they said no. In fact, the advice they gave us is, here's what you should do. If the screen's small, just pretend like there's not a keyboard. Like, literally. Oh, and with touch is present, which we found out you can't actually do. And as sort of short-sighted as this advice is, ultimately, this is what we ended up doing. So for our create flow, across all devices, if you're on a small screen or any size screen and you want to use touch, you can. You can drag and move around any of these images here. You can get them to exactly where you like them, right? Just sort of flip them around. You can do pinch and zoom to resize and zoom anything you like and get exactly that layout that you want for those images using touch gestures. Let's say you move to a larger size screen. You can still use touch, no problem. All those interactions work. But as we get to a little bit bigger size form factor, what we actually do is bring up a couple little tips here that tell you how to do it with a cursor. So you can use the scroll wheel to zoom. And you can just see us flicking through here with that scroll wheel to do that same level of zooming you can still do with touch. And then we create this double click to fit. So you can just, and it'll snap exactly into place to fit inside of that viewport. And we bring these tips up for people to let them know what's possible with the mouse. Now, I'm the first person to tell you that assuming a mobile device is a multi-touch device and a larger screen device is a cursor and keyboard device is flat out wrong. Right? Using screen size as a proxy for input makes no sense, especially when you consider what are you going to do? How are you going to detect voice? Oh, if it's a small screen, I can do voice detection. If it's a medium-sized screen, I can't use my voice to give it commands. It shows the folly of it. But like today, this kind of faking it is really all we have to make this happen. But I still contend, just accept all the inputs. Let people use voice. Let people use touch. Let people use keyboard. Let people use mouse. Just make it work with everything. And then whatever kind of wacky device situation you end up. Yesterday, Samsung announced the Galaxy S Edge 6 quad-core dual processor Omni Optibus 5 Plus. Thank you. I knew I forgot something. But one of the things this device has, you can snap an old school BlackBerry keyboard to the bottom of the device. Have you seen this? It's literally like a condom cover that you put at the bottom. And I say condom because there used to be a game played, is it an Android device or a condom? Have you ever played this? So people would say something like HTC Desire, and you're like, is that a condom or is it an Android device? Look it up. You'll burn like half an hour. You'll be wrong 75% of the time. But anyway, so there's this keyboard thing that you stick on the bottom. And how do you know if there's a keyboard there? How do you know if somebody put this keyboard condom on their mobile phone? And yada, yada. Anyway, maybe I'm the one that thinks of that way. I've played that game too much. This is my problem. So it's a bad proxy, but it's all we got. And then here's another thing that we totally messed up with this interface. We thought we were being all clever at the time in that we were like, OK, so because we're trying to design for comfortability of touch, and we want to have this on this side so you can flick this up and down, we want to have this over here so you really comfortably can vote, whether it's a mobile, a tablet, or a touch-based laptop. We thought that was cool. But what happened with this layout is it totally looked different than any layout of any other app or site. because the content and the nav were off to the sides. And for every other thing you see ever in your life, it's all in the middle and centered. Now, I don't necessarily think that's a good thing. I think that may be an artifact of what we've been doing forever, and we just do it, right? Because it's actually hard on these kinds of devices to get to that content and interactions. But nonetheless, everybody's expectation was that it would look like this, and they saw this, and they're like, why? And it's really hard to explain, well, we've actually designed this so that's more comfortable for you to use with your fingers. When people used it, they don't even think, if it works when they're using it that way, they don't even think about it. It just is more comfortable, right? So I think we failed a little bit there. And then the other thing that we really screwed up was we tried to make this an independent scrolling area, so you could really quickly flick, and you'd have all the stuff stay still. And what we learned instantly is that everybody was trying to scroll this whole thing. They thought this whole thing was a scrollable area, and it was like a bug that we had forever because it was core to the underlying thing that we built, and to fix it, you'd have to tear everything apart. You know those kinds of bugs? Right? It seems like it's, oh, why don't you just change that? Yeah, I friggin' like to change that, but it's like a month to tear the whole thing apart. It doesn't seem like it should be, but it is. You're like, why is it that way? It's one of those things. Every time I'd like tweet one of these pages out, I'd get 10 comments. Why can't I scroll this area? It sucked. Anywho, so those are just some things that we were doing multi-device design-wise from an output perspective and from an input perspective. There's a third piece to multi-device design that I think is also important and probably underappreciated. So one is, how do you show things to people? How do you put it on screens, right? That's the output. How do you let people interact with it? That's the input. How do you let them sort of participate in the system? But then the third one is this idea that I call posture. And to talk about posture, I want to just set expectations that these devices don't live in isolation, right? And when I say that, I mean they fit into our lives sometimes by themselves, sometimes together, in fact, increasingly together. Right? Increasingly, how many of you do this? If the TV's on, you still have your phone in your hand? Or it's like right next to you, and as soon as something gets boring, like a lot of this device use is simultaneous, either sequential or simultaneous, or what have you. And a lot of these insights were the root of a project that we did with Microsoft around this concept that they had called a companion web. And what they really wanted to do is make these things support each other when it was appropriate. Okay? So we would build software where the two devices you have sort of support each other in a common task in ways that are appropriate for each device. To illustrate that, let me show you what we actually made. So they had released the Xbox One. With the Xbox One, you could just use a voice command that says, hey, IE, open Polar. And then we'd bring up this little connection. We had a couple different ways of connecting it, but you connect it with the phone. And now your phone is in control of what's on a big screen TV. And so you can vote and see results. You can switch your vote and see results. You can start to scroll, and we just change the UI there and show you that list moving. And again, if you voted, you'd see other stuff. And then you could say things like watch a show, and when you watch that show, what would happen is on your device, you could do more precise things like bring up information about it, and then you could see all the things that people are asking or talking about in that show, and you could participate and interact alongside that media. And the part that was interesting to me about this was we let each device do what it's good for. Right? As you can see here, you can just lean back and see people and see what they're saying while you're watching the show. This is kind of like a lean back, 10-foot experience, and you can see the results change of who's most right or who's most wrong when we did like live events with sports and things like this. But the principle was the phone in your pocket is super easy for this lightweight input. You can just go scroll, 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 I think this, I think that, scroll, 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 you're done. The TV is terrible for that, like this remote where you go up and down. It was just brutal. So don't make the TV do that. Let TV be this big picture view where you just watch what's happening, and let the phone be the thing that captures your input. So from a high-level principles perspective, I think that makes a ton of sense. But what we found was we need to consider more than just the device when we create a multi-device experience. This is what I mean by posture. So if you look at a 50-inch HD TV, something that's 1080p, it's got about that many pixels. A 5-inch Galaxy S4, which is a 5-inch device, has that many pixels. So you can't really look at the pixels on a screen or the resolution of a screen and make a decision about how it's used in our lives. And more concretely, the TV is a 10-foot-away experience, and the phone is about a 1-foot-away experience. Right? Two very different modes of experience. And by default, if you're just relying on screen heuristics, what you're going to do is you're going to end up getting the same kind of default width you get on the TV with an Xbox One as you get on a mobile device. So this 10-foot-away experience renders essentially your mobile experience up on a wall, which I don't think anybody would argue that's a good idea. So we had to do explicit things to change the interface to make it more of a 10-foot-away interface as opposed to a 1-foot-away interface, as you saw with that demo video that I showed you. And it turns out, this will get a bit more into this posture aspect, in order to do that, you need to know a little maths. And Netflix has a good way of doing this. They actually employ very tall mathematicians to help them out. And this is a guy that they know as 10-foot user interface design guy. There is also a 2-foot guy, an 18-inch guy. And no, we're not talking about the height of the people here. We're actually talking about the interface that they work on. In particular, the viewing distance of the interface. Right? The 10-foot away, the 2-foot away, and the 18 inches away is actually a viewing distance measure. And why does a company like Netflix do this? Because if you look at all the devices people use to view Netflix, you will find a dizzying array of different devices. They're on about 500 different SKUs. Right? It's like 12% PS3, 15% Blu-ray player, 13% Wii. And if you're trying to create or design and build an experience for all these devices, and you're looking at them at that level, what is the PS3 experience? What is the Blu-ray? You're quickly going to start swimming in way too many options and complexity to support anything. So looking at it as a list of devices or a list of screens is not great. But if you break this down by posture, if you say, how many of these people are having a 10-foot-away experience? How many of them are having a 2-foot-away experience, a 1-foot-away experience, a 1.5-foot experience? Then all of a sudden, you're down to 4 things. Right? 10 feet away is the big screen view. 2 feet away is the laptop. 1 foot away is a smartphone. And 1.5, 18 inches is about a tablet kind of thing. And you go from 500 different SKUs down to 4 experiences. And what does this look like concretely? Let me actually show you how this works. So 23% of Netflix customers view the service on a smartphone. That means they have this 12-inch away interface. And for a 12-inch away interface, what they do is they have about a 1-inch sized display of the screen in search results and browse. And you may say, well, why 1 inch? Because when we start talking about things like posture, and we talk about direct manipulation, we talk about the interface relative to the scale of the human body, pixels make no sense. Right? We're not made up of pixels. There's no pixels around us, so we use physical dimensions to measure this. So that's the 12-inch experience. If you then zoom out to the 18-inch experience, a la a tablet, you'll find that that exact same UI has scaled up to 1 3/4 inches. Laptop experience, the background is a little different. I think they've made this more consistent now, but on a laptop 2 feet away, that same UI experience, the box art is sized at 2 1/4 inches. Scaling all the way out to 10 feet, where that you have that big screen experience, that same UI is 5 1/4 inches. And if you lay this out, right, if you sort of look at the range from 10 feet to 12 inches, you can see a consistency of scaling this. And if you, depending on how you do the math, because there's a bit of debate on this, whether this is 12 inches or 10 inches, depending on whose research you look at, it's about 1/2 inch per foot where you increase the screen size. Now, I had been looking for sort of a magic formula here underneath this, because there's this Silicon Valley legend that I had heard a bunch of times about the chief product officer for Netflix, Neil Hunt. And the legend goes, Neil Hunt walked into this thing, which you may know of, you may not, called a video store. You familiar with this? Okay, awkward laugh. This was a building that you went into where there was like wrapped up paper boxes representing movies, and you would view these movies, and then you'd like pick up a plastic version of the movie behind it, and you'd take it home and bring it back. Does this make any sense to you? No, I don't think you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, the legend was he would go to this video store, and he would sort of stand where he could see the box art, or he could interpret what's on each box art, and he would measure how far away he was and the size of the box art. And he came up with this formula by which to size the interface. I have since heard that is not true. I have since heard that is true. That's why it's a legend. Whether or not he did it or not, it doesn't matter. The point is, this isn't a new concept. If you look at the signage manual for the London Underground, right, when they talk about how to size type on signs, the further away it is, the bigger the font should be. Kind of makes sense, right? But this is an idea that's been very absent from software design because we've only had one set of ergonomics to deal with. And in fact, as software designers, we've never had to think about it because somebody else made the mouse. Somebody else made the keyboard, right? And you just sort of take it for granted. Okay, I've got this cursor on the screen. Somebody else took care of typing. And I don't care. I mean, I know there's only one distance you could possibly be from a computer screen. There's no variance. Now, this is no longer true. We have to care about things like this. One other thing that I think is kind of interesting that we ended up doing for Microsoft that we learned a lot about was, you'll note, not only did we change the UI, but we also inverted the color set here. Sort of inversed it. And one of the big reasons behind this was when we actually looked at where these things were used, we found not only was it 10 feet away, but in a lot of situations it was this light low light level environment. So we didn't actually want a real strong contrast permeating from the TV UI. And especially when you couple it with the fact that we wanted to display content next to it, we needed it to reduce in strength. Whereas on the phone, we had almost the opposite impact. And there's some cool ways to do this with proximity sensors or ambient light sensors, all this sort of stuff. If you've ever used a Maps app or increasingly news apps on one of your smartphones, you'll notice at night it changes to this high contrast mode, which is stuff we had been doing in software for many years, but now it's accessible through this ambient light sort of layer, which is kind of cool. So with posture, not only can you account for the relation of the human body to your software, but you can also kind of account for the relation of the environment to your software. Hey, it's kind of dark where this person is. Let me change things up. Last but not least, another thing that we did in the multi-device exploration space that was definitely exploratory was we tried to design something for this device. I'm just going to leave that up for a while because it says so much. Okay. That's what it really looks like. The interesting thing about Google Glass was that it had a lot of commonality, actually, with the TV interface. When people think about Google Glass, their mental image a lot of times is what you actually get with a VR headset, where you can sort of like have this augmented reality view of the world. That's not how Glass works. What Glass actually does is it projects a screen in your peripheral vision that you can sort of just glance up at and see some information, right? You just kind of go like this, and there it is, and then it goes away. But it was the equivalent of viewing information on a HD screen about 25 feet away. If you actually dig into it, you can figure out exactly how many pixels that screen had, which is good, and you can learn a bunch of stuff about it. But the bottom line was it had a dynamic viewport. That means it would resize content. So for example, if you went to a web page, right, if you went to a website, it would resize that website to fit the screen. So if I was trying to look up stocks on this little screen, 8 feet away, 25-inch screen, floating in my peripheral, and I ended up on Yahoo Finance, this is what I would see. Does anybody believe that is good? No. But let's say they did some screen adaptation and resized based on the size of the pixels. then maybe they get this responsive design view that looks something like this. Oh, kind of crappy. The glassware cards that were made for glass actually ended up looking like this. This is what Wikipedia looks like on Google Glass. This is what ESPN looks like on Google Glass. So you can see it's a lot more like designing a dashboard almost, like a 10-foot away view, even though it's designed for the eyes. Anyway, with our app Polar, we thought, oh, this is awesome. We're totally going to use this because we got the best use case in the world. Like, let's say you're out in the world, right, and you sort of see this, and you can just sort of have glass on your face, and you look at it, and you're like, oh my God, who is the bigger idiot? Who parked worse, right? And so you can just like really quickly wink your eye, it takes a picture, and you make this question, you blast it out. Fantastic, right? Or you're in the store, which dress should I buy? There you go. So we built up this prototype, and what we learned was there's no keyboard on glass, and so everything is audio input. And so this is what the process would look like. You kind of come up to this car, right? And you'd be there, and you kind of wink, it takes a picture, and then you'd have to swipe and then tap your glasses and say, who parked worse, question mark. Okay, next, to recognize that. And you say, capital G, capital M, capital C. Okay, next. Like infinity, no, infinity. Okay, next. And at that point, who's the bigger idiot? You or the people that parked there? So I'm going to chalk this up as an example of multi-device design fail on our part. And while we were kind of excited at the beginning, we ultimately realized, based on the input, based on the posture, based on the environment, the design we were putting together, it didn't make a lot of sense. And this is kind of what I want to leave you with from a multi-device design perspective point of view. There's output, right? Increasingly, the mobile experience is really critical for that. When you look across the usage of devices out there and you look at where the dominant interactions are, it's on these mobile devices. But at the same time, we want to make sure that things will work across multiple screens. There's a lot of stuff that we can borrow from responsive web design, whether we're building natively or on the web, for making software work that way. From an input perspective, if you recall, we tried to fight against keyboard versus touch and identifying it and changing the UI. And ultimately, I hit this moment of Zen where it's just like, accept all the inputs. And when you accept all the inputs, sometimes you want to let people know what's possible, right? Bring up a little tooltip. Here's what you can do with the mouse. Here's what you can do with the keyboard. And you use the screen size as a proxy for those tips. So if you're wrong, it's just you showed an irrelevant tip. It's not that big a deal. And last but not least, we were just talking about this, which is posture. And posture to me is how people interact with the output and input of the display. Right? This is the human scale question. Things like viewing distance, things like the environment, things like came into play with that Google Glass prototype. I think those things have a really big impact on building in this way in aggregate. So that's kind of the combination of output, input, and posture. Hopefully it gives you a sense of some of the designery things we were doing back in startup life, why we were doing them, how we were thinking about them, and some of the things we learned. So thanks. So with that, I think we're going to open it up to questions for a while. And I know there was a long list before, but let's see where we end up. Yeah. I guess just come to the mic. Is that the format? Yes. Okay. There's one right there. And there's one back there. Oh, there you go. Or you can just raise your hand and yell something if that's easier.
Right. And we have design actions or whoever asks a good question. Okay, come over here.
Yeah, or just, yeah, there you go. Or just yell it out. I'll repeat your question. It's okay.
Luke, when you were showing us the different form factors for the devices and the sweet spot for touch, everybody that was drawn was right-handed. is that actually an optimization that you guys drop
Yeah.
left-handed users?
It's actually a great question. How many people are right-handed? Raise your hand. How many people hate participating in little surveys? Okay, that's our margin of error, so let's try it again. How many people are right-handed? Okay, how many people are left-handed? So generally what you find is about 90% of the world is right-handed, as this evidenced. Now, those of you who are left-handed, how many of you use your mobile device with your right hand? Okay, so what you generally find is about 60% of people who are left-handed use their mobile device with their right hand. So 90% are right-handed, 60% of that 10% use the phone with their right hand. You're talking about a pretty small fraction of people, which is why you don't see a lot of people optimizing for left-handed use, because it's just not really that big of a use case. Apologies for lefties who use your left hand. But the real answer is you can design in a way that's a little bit more ambidextrous. And so a lot of the examples I showed there would work equally well like this as they would like this.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, just yell it out.
So I feel like choosing the name for the product you're designing is also really important. So I wonder if you chose the name for your product as Polar,
Yeah.
what did that use?
Okay, so choosing the name for your product is really important, and how do we go about it? The short answer is the startup I did before that, we totally fucked up. And we called our product Bag Check. And what Bag Check was, it was a service, it came from this little insight that we had, which is when I went mountain biking with my mountain biking buddies, we talked half the time about wheels and bike seats and pedals and helmets. When I went out with my friends surfing, we talk about surfboards. You know, like there was all these conversations happening around the stuff we used to do the things we loved, and there wasn't really a great way for people to share that. So we created Bag Check under this premise of we saw lots of communities on Flickr posting, here's my camera bag, and they'd lay out all their gear. Here's my camping bag, and they'd lay out all their gear. Here's my hiking bag, and they'd lay out their gear. Like, this is awesome. There's this meme, right? People taking what's in their bag and showing what's inside and talking about how they use this stuff to do what they love. So we called the product Bag Check, which turned out to be terrible because everybody associates a bag check with getting fondled in airport security. And it was just the worst association. Every time I went through airport security and someone would be like, bag check! So it was a big mistake. And then with the second company, I was reminded of that incident and tried to avoid it. And so we were a lot more careful with the name we picked. And ultimately, we picked something that was short and memorable and to the point. And I think a lot of times people try to be a little too clever. So we just kind of called it Polar, even there was a couple other things out there called Polar, but it was polling. Plus, it allowed us to make all those awesome polar bears you saw in the slides. And we made tons of shirts with them, and we made tons of stickers with them, and that was, yeah. So I don't have like a magic system, but I know one time we did it pretty badly, and the other time we seemed to do it much better. Yeah.
When I came in, you were talking about posture and the magic formula. Are there any special guidelines when you're designing for kids or the younger demographic?
Designing for a younger demographic?
Yeah, I was actually working on a smartwatch and a mobile project for kids aged 5 to 7.
Yeah.
And we saw a huge difference between that very tiny range. So I was just wondering if you had...
Yeah, I think one of the biggest differences that you will see, especially across mobile usage and kids, let me open this up, is how much they freaking use it. So this is a little chart that shows people in the UK, average number of times of daily sessions on a mobile phone by age. And if you come all the way up to 15-year-olds, they are on their phone 400 times a day. Now, let's do math for a second. 400 times a day, you look at the average number of minutes in a day, every other minute, every other waking minute of a typical day, they are on their phone. So this is kind of one of the things that I see is the biggest difference is a lot of the younger demographics are very active on these devices and sometimes much more open to doing things that we don't do. Another thing that I hear all the time, and this is especially true in my current role, I hear a lot of people making these statements like, oh, we should get people off the phone because that's not real life. They're not in the real world, right? They're like on this digital world. It's not real life. And I'm always reminded of this quote by William Gibson where he says, the thing our grandchildren will find the most quaint about us is that we distinguished the digital from the real. And like, do people really care? We care that this is a real book. Smell it. You feel that in your hand? That's a book. What you got on the phone there, that is not a book. Right? This is a book. It's got paper. A tree died to give this book to you. So we have this really strong sense of the difference between the digital and real, and I also find a lot of the younger generations, to them it's just talking to people, right? Like, when they talk on messaging or when they talk on these apps, they're having as authentic a conversation as we would have in person and judged by our metrics. I'm actually looking for one other little bit of data I saw half a second ago that I think is relevant to this. Where did I put it? There's a thing that talked about how much reading is now happening on smartphones, which is another thing that a lot of people push back on in very big ways. They'll be like, nobody will do that on a mobile device. Nobody's going to read on a mobile device. No one's going to blank on a mobile device. And I don't know where I put this, but I will dig it up at some place. Here we go. More than half of digital book readers use a smartphone, which is double the number that we had about 3 years ago, right? So if you look at how much people are actually reading on smartphones, the stats are buried in here somewhere. You get the idea, though. More than half of digital book readers use a smartphone, which is double the number of things yesterday. So this whole notion of digital and the real, the younger generation doesn't have this issue as much as we do. And I think we're in a transitionary period where we haven't embraced what digital is and should be and could be, and a lot of times they have. And their expectations are just pretty damn different than ours. Yeah?
I appreciate you pointing out both the qualitative and quantitative, but I think even this point gets to it that while I have a couple of twin girls who are about to be 13 and they probably hit that mark, wanting them to have visceral experiences is important. So I don't think for those of us who live in this world, it's either or. But I do want to ask about your demographics because my kids make fun of me that I only use one thumb. Can you hold this a minute? Literally.
Now you only use one?
Yeah, so I use one thumb, when I'm texting or something, and they're like this. So I think that in the...
Yeah, it's probably because they're texting all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the argument was the younger demographic makes fun of her for using a single thumb. It's kind of like chicken pecking on the keyboard, right? Does anybody type like this still?
So
I do.
I'm just pointing out that this generation, evolving generation, is going to have another impact on what we optimize our...
Yeah, it might. Things are always changing. I mean, this is the thing with technology. Things continue to change. And like I said, ancient history is what I'm presenting, right? Because it's a year old. And that data is like a year and a half old, and has the onslaught of 5.5-inch phones changed it dramatically? Are people becoming even more comfortable with typing on mobile devices? Will voice alleviate all those things anyway? Certainly in different regions, a lot of people communicate not by calls, but by speaking to their phone because it's frankly easier than typing in a lot of cases. So maybe the behavior is back to one thumb in a year because everybody's just saying things and they're not, who knows? Yeah. Yeah. Hello.
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 Sorry. So this not really exactly related to design, but so once you made Polar, how long were you kind of like focusing on user growth before you got acquired by Google? And how did that process even happen? Like, how did you get the app in front of Google? Why were they interested in you initially? Did you have friends that were at Google, or like how this happened? Not to say that the app wasn't good.
Yes. That's my answer, yes. So we followed a journey that I think is appropriate for a product in that we had some initial ideas on what problem we were trying to solve, which is when we started the app, and this goes back to a conversation I had with a couple folks at the beginning. There are no original ideas, just original executions. Because there's been a ton of apps since Polar and probably before Polar and will be more that kind of play in this same space. But our thinking was, we want to make it super easy for you to get the opinions of other people. And like, we thought this was a really human need. Everybody has an opinion that they want to tell you what they think about this, right? And a lot of times you have questions where you actually want some opinions to help you make a decision. And so the use cases we imagined at the beginning were things like, which dress should I buy? Which restaurant should I go to for this? That kind of stuff, right? These kind of personal social use cases. So we built a product that was very much focused on those personal social use cases. And what we really quickly found is that people were using it very differently than we believed they were. What we learned was they were using it as a conversation starter. And so the kinds of things they would post questions about weren't which shoes should I wear. They were like, oh my God, did you see the Game of Thrones thing last night? Can you believe what happened? What do you think is going to happen next? Should this guy have died or should they all have died? Oh my God, they all died. Right? And so a lot of times the questions were very topical and were very water coolery. So we saw that and we were like, okay, well, this is sort of deviating us from our original vision, but that's cool, let's play it out. So the next thing we did was we added the ability to categorize these questions around a theme. And you could sort of tag them, you can put them into sets. And people started doing that. So they'd have like, here's my Game of Thrones questions from this week. Or here's the new Apple iOS 7 icons or iOS 8 icons, whatever it was. Which one do you like better, before and after? Here's all the tech logo redesigns I showed you. They make sets. And when that happened, we made it so easy for people to voice their opinion. We got lots of opinions very, very quickly. And tech press started picking up on our results because when we launched, PS3 versus Xbox One, we'd collect 100,000 votes in a couple hours, and they started to write stories about it. 100,000 people like this, 10,000 people like that, whatever. They're like desperate for any kind of things that make them seem right. So they started like taking screenshots of our app and posting it inside of their articles. And we thought, well, this is interesting, but that sucks for them. So let's make an embeddable thing. And then we made an embeddable thing, and we went to the publishers and like, hey, now you can ask these questions in your articles. And that was a real turning point because what we realized was now you could take these questions and put them where people cared. So when you're reading a story about LeBron James's new face mask, does it look stupid or awesome? Is it intimidating? Did it help him? Did it not help him? You can just go crazy. And what happened is that was when our growth really took off because all of a sudden we contextualized the questions in the places where they mattered. And what the publishers end up valuing is not the fact that people could answer questions, but when they dropped Polar into their pages and into their apps, they could say, hey, before Polar we had 30 seconds spent per article. Now we have 45 seconds spent per article. We can take it out, that 15 seconds goes away. And so what we ultimately ended up with is a service that created more time spent and more engagement for publishers. What we began with was a service for collecting opinions from your friends. And I bring this up to sort of illustrate the journey we went on. That was the thing that really defined the whole course of the company, and that was the thing that I think got us to a product that we were proud of and that worked and that started us on conversations with Google because we followed the breadcrumbs and we just kept being like, well, that sucks. Let's fix it. Oh, now we're here. Well, that sucks. Let's fix it. Oh, now we're here. And just kept riding that train. So that would be my strong advice is have a vision, but be willing to change. But don't change just for the sake of change. Change because you genuinely think you're doing something that matters for somebody. Yep. Yeah.
Hi. Earlier we were talking about the scrolling action being very natural, but is there something like too much scrolling when we're talking about information discovery, in the context of information discovery? And that's where me as a designer has to make a decision if I should ask the user to keep scrolling or I should use other other things like progressive disclosure and start hiding information? What's
Yeah.
that sweet spot?
Yeah, scrolling is a funny thing. For so many years, we heard, people won't scroll, can we get them to scroll? And then we're like, stop people from scrolling, they're scrolling. There's this whole thing about the fold, right? We went and ran a bunch of analysis around the fold. And what we found was when you look at least pages in particular, what happens is, this is a 25 million session sort of analysis, many people start to scroll before the page fully loads. And so a lot of people that publish stuff are like, oh God, stop them from scrolling. They literally hijack scrolling and stop you from scrolling. And then the peak, the most viewed area is actually this thing just above the fold. It's not the fold. The pixels above the fold are actually viewed for the least amount of time and all these sorts of things. But if you remember arguments that we would have a couple years ago, it would always be nobody scrolls. If you don't put something above the fold, nobody will ever see it, right? Turns out, well, that's not actually true. And so my mindset on all this stuff is just let people do what they want to do. What you should be focused on instead is making a page that loads fast, making an app that loads fast so people can see what you have for them and then decide whether or not they should scroll. When you do that, very good things happen. I just literally posted half a minute ago, or maybe not half a minute ago, sorry. I was talking to you guys half a minute ago. But GQ just published this page load performance thing. Page load time went down 80%, traffic went up 80%. All right, and so a lot of this stuff is really oriented to giving people appropriate expectations that then let them know whether or not they should scroll or not scroll, versus trying to hijack scrolling, stop scrolling, or anything like that. I wouldn't do that. I would just try to let people know what's possible and then give them the choice to do what is right based on their use case. Yeah. You want to run the mic up? Or? Okay.
A lot of startups have limited budgets, and so they have to make that decision whether to just use a responsive web design or a native app. What's your thoughts on what could help them make that decision?
If you should make a native app or you should make a responsive website. First of all, I think you should make a responsive website if you make a website. I don't think there is any other kind of website to make other than a responsive website, just because there's such a diversity of devices out there. Now, whether or not you actually make a native app in addition to a web experience is a different ballgame, right? If you look at native compared to web, what you'll find is, and these numbers have actually stayed pretty consistent over the years, the average number of apps used per month is about 26. Per week, it's about 7. 42% of time spent goes to one app. And actually, let me be even more egregious about this and show you like the harder metrics. Those are, believe it or not, that's actually the easy metrics. Let's look at some of the harder metrics. So the opportunity is huge for native apps in that there is 5.2 billion mobile phone users, 40% of them are smartphone users, and they're all turning over to smartphone users, which means pretty much anybody who's living on this rock spinning around our sun that is semi-literate, I include semi because we actually include children here, can have a mobile device. There's about 7 billion people on the planet. 5.2 billion can become a mobile user. The other, like 1.81, however you want to cut it, just are not in that camp of possibility. So you have the ability to reach the entire planet. However, 42% of all mobile app activity occurs in the most used app, and 75% of app time spent happens in the top 4 apps, which means it is a very, very high bar to become one of those services. If you become one of those services, you are worth about $19 billion to Facebook. Right? So huge upside, but also huge risk and very difficult to make things work in that environment. And I was bringing up the less harsh stats, but what you find here is, and I say less harsh just because it sounds better when you say that people use 30 different apps a month versus the fact that they use 75% of time is spent in 4, right? But anyway, if you look across the web, they actually view about 24 different websites per day. So that is, it's not equivalent engagement by any means, right? But from a discoverability perspective, you have a capability to reach people that is much higher on the web as a platform than you have to reach people on a native app platform. The opposite is true in terms of richness. This is from an early thing on Polar, but what you can see here is this is engagement in our iOS app. Lots of engagement, tons of engagement, meaning people that get into the app do a lot of stuff, right? However, the quantity of people we get into the app is this really slow, painful slog, whereas on the web, right, we can reach a ton of different people. And there's benefits to both things, right? There's benefits to reach, to being accessible on any device anywhere through something as simple as a URL. And then there's benefits to the richness you get inside of a native application. And what you see is this classic pendulum swinging in that we're always trying to bring richness and reach together, whether it's making rich apps in the web browser or now making native apps support links or deep linking or do the stuff that the web does. There's always this like kind of push and pull. But the two things actually do very different things for your strategy, and most strategies are about reaching an audience, but then also allowing that audience, once you reach them, to really get engaged and do the kinds of things that create value for them and for you. Yeah?
How many users did you have before you started designing for so many screens?
How many users do we have when we started designing for which streams?
No, like how many users did you have before you decided to design for so many screens?
Oh, before so many like multi-device screens and all that stuff? Oh, well, we made it a responsive web design from day one. The first implementation we made was across the web that worked on every device, and then we kicked off an iOS app after that. And then we started exploring these other things. And in all honesty, we started exploring the Google Glass thing just because we kind of nerded out. I would say maybe it was a tangent and we shouldn't have done it. But we did the TV stuff very explicitly with Microsoft because we formed a partnership with them and we thought it'd be a channel for growth for us because of the way we would get press and access to their partners. And some of those things came true, right? We did get access to a couple media partners, which helped us grow and that thing. But they were like more, yeah, they weren't based off of metrics of how many people we had on each platform before we invested in them.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah?
Can you talk about the mobile video and designing experiences for creating content on mobile devices?
Yeah, so mobile native video, and what does that mean? How does that work? I have a interesting little walkthrough, which I may be able to pull out here. Yeah, I got this. So where did I put this? Yeah. So here we go. So if you kind of look at some of the things I talked about before, but I'm just going to show them in slide form. Average size of the screen going up, right? I misspoke earlier. 4.8 inches is the average size now, so getting close to 5 inches. And gradually things are getting bigger depending on the different region you look at. You find different things, but overall pretty consistently across Europe, Asia, United States, and all these things. You have a consistent size screen. And then if you also look at orientation, whether it's portrait or horizontal landscape across all those different form factors, what you find the very dominant use case is in vertical, in portrait, and landscape is very low. Now this is biased by not looking explicitly at long game sessions per se. But if you're just thinking about video, and if you really want to build native video formats, I would argue that the vertical portrait format is actually a much more native mobile format for video than the horizontal layer. And you're actually seeing a bunch of companies have success with this, whether it's the Snapchats or the Periscopes or whatever. They sort of embrace this as a native form of video, as opposed to fighting it because video is like this, and that's what we understand video to be.
Can I ask one? So I have a quick question. How do one get acquired by Google and Twitter?
Yeah, you don't want that to happen to you. I'm just dead serious, right? Like, you don't start a company with the interests of getting acquired by a company. If that's your goal, if that's your question, you should just stop and go and try to get a job at Google or Twitter, right? I mean, you're going to be, in all honesty, you'll be much better off. Because when you get acquired by a company, you don't necessarily go in there understanding the stuff they have in mind for you. Right? You understand that they place a bit of a value on your company, and you understand what you can go in there, but you have no idea about what their internal stuff is like and what you're going to do for them. When I was at Yahoo, we acquired lots of companies. And for example, we'd acquire a video company and make the video company VP the PM of, like managing the queue for the video feeds, because we really, really needed somebody to do that. Just being honest, right? Like, we did that. I'm not saying Google does that or Twitter does that or anybody does that today, but like, it's very real that there are real needs that exist inside of companies that they know about and you don't necessarily know about, right? And in those cases, you get brought in to do different things, and you have your own vision. That company has its own vision. You have your own culture. That company has their own culture. All these things are different. Right? So if you're going to start a company, you should start a company with the end goal of being an amazing company, right? Being successful. To me, I don't view selling companies as a success of the original mission. I believe there's lots of things you do, and you look at your decisions, and you decide what the right thing is for your employees, and for your investors, and for your product, and where you're at, and you make choices, right? But I would absolutely, hands down, 199% not start a company with the ambition of selling it to another company. That's all.
You mentioned that upfront tutorials in apps kind of suck.
Yeah.
If you have to teach people how to use the app or introduce them to new concepts that are important to the app, what are better tactics or strategies?
Yeah, in the interest of time, I won't show you my 20 slides on that. But the general tactics is that you want to teach in context and in the moment, right? So when I was showing that vote, pull up for more, hey, did you know you can also skip? Oh, I had just learned to vote on 5 things. Now I have learned a new skill at the time and place where it was most appropriate. So that is actually very hard to do. And I will show these stats one more time just to echo this point. I actually think I have a different view of these stats that maybe is even more, painful, apparent. Let's see if I have it in a different slide. As I look this up, I'll continue talking. Onboarding is very, very hard, right? Getting people into a product and engaged, especially in native apps, is a very, very difficult thing to do. 99.99% of services fail to engage people long term, and that's why there's only 4 apps that people use 75% of the time. And that's why engagement falls off by like 33% on the first day, and by the 10th day, you're down to like 20% of your audience, or even worse. It's very, very hard to do. And so what a lot of people do is they look for silver bullets, like, oh, we'll put an intro tour on it. Oh, we'll do this kind of thing, right? And the real work that you want to do is find the right time and place for each either task they have to do to onboard or kind of messaging and education you want to give them. And I say it's hard to do because finding the right time and right place for things is much more complicated than just shoving stuff up front. The best way that I have found to find the right time and right place for things, we at Google run this thing that I call RITE, Rapid Iterative Testing and Evaluation. So the way it works is every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, small team of designers and engineers designs and codes a prototype. Every Thursday, we bring in 6 people from the outside. We run them through what we built Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then repeat the following week. Repeat the following week. And with that, we're testing 2 things. We're testing, is our intent clear? Meaning the ideas we're trying to communicate, are you understanding this the way we understand this? We think this is for, connecting with your friends around pink flamingos. You're like, oh, I thought this was for bears meeting each other. Like, whoa, okay. Something's going wrong with our design. All right, so we do that for that, to understand if our intent is coming through. And the second piece we use it for is to do design Q&A, usability, kinds of things like that. But through that weekly iterative cycle, we do a lot of things with testing onboarding. And each and every single time we sort of like get it one step closer and we find, oh, that's the place where we should tell them about this, because then they do that, then they get the rest. And you do a couple cycles of that. Usually what happens is the first week it's a disaster. Second week you fix a bunch of the main things. Third week it's tweaking and tuning, and by the fourth week you're good to go. But most people don't employ that sort of iterative, ongoing approach to solving these kinds of problems. They look for blanket solutions, patterns, or frankly, they debate in a room, and whoever yells the loudest, that's the thing you do.
Hi, Luke. Thank you for sharing the insights. So in one of your earlier talks, not here, but previous talks, you talk about the natural zone as the lower right bottom of the phone screen and the center part. So does that apply to all of the contexts and all kinds of devices? And does it apply to both native app and responsive web design?
Yeah, sort of like the comfortable to hit area.
Right.
Yeah, I think it still remains that way. I showed that picture, and it becomes even a bit more true when you look at larger screen sizes. Because with larger screen sizes, the comfortable to reach area gets even worse as you make your way to bigger screens. I'm not 100% sure that right corner is the best place, but like sort of the middle-ish area right here is generally the most consistent across the board. No.
So how come so many apps out there, they have the like menu button at the top left-hand corner?
Because they saw somebody else doing it? No, I'm not trying to be cheeky. I'm being dead honest, right? Like, what happens 90% of the time is when you start to go design your app, you either go look at other apps or you have in your head the way other apps have done things, and your first reaction is to do it the way other people have done it. I was actually recently pointed to the scientific term for this, which is called design fixation. And design fixation is based on your prior experience with something or your look at, like, say, competitor stuff, you get these ideas stuck in your head, and even subconsciously, you adhere to them whether or not you know you're doing it or not.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
One last question.
So, what's our timing? One more? Okay. Go ahead.
Can you speak a little bit about life after assimilation? Was it the right decision for you guys?
Oh yeah, for us it was absolutely the right decision, right? I just mean don't romanticize it in a way that is this glorious outcome that's all rainbows and unicorns and this sort of stuff. Like, it was absolutely the right thing for us, and we're super happy about it, and it's all good. But I'm also the kind of person who had spent 7 years in big internet companies before. So for me, it's not assimilation. For me, it's coming back to something that I've been doing before, but I feel stronger because I had gone out and done things on my own and learned a bunch more things. So I feel a lot more informed about how to do stuff, and I think I can actually be more successful in that environment. But you get a lot of people who haven't had that experience necessarily and come straight from a startup into a big company. And that can be a culture shock. Right? If you go from the only thing I've known is startups, and I love startups, oh my God, I'm in a big company, I have to ask somebody to do something, Because it's true, the accountability in a big company is very different than the accountability in a startup, for good reason. Right? Like, God bless all those processes that they have that prevent somebody from destroying $50 billion worth of revenue in a day. Like, they should absolutely have those processes, and it's really good that they do. But it can be a culture clash for people coming out of the startup world into a big company, because that's not how they worked before.
One last question.
Sure.
So, Luke, seems like you have like a good slide for every question, so I'm trying to make it really hard.
Okay, make it.
So that you won't have it.
Okay.
So
it's a challenge, huh? Haha.
So the question is, like, for most of the audience here, like people who are working like 2 or 3 people on a startup, design is always at the back of your mind, but you don't have enough resources. You're trying to figure out if people really want your product, or is it like something that you can do so that it's more easy. From your experience, can you share maybe like some hacks that startups can do? Like, how do startups hack design, and maybe some tools?
Yeah, I don't know if hack is something you can apply to every term, right? You can't hack everything.
Maybe some other word. Like,
yeah.
But like, what are some shortcuts? You know what?
So you can embody parts of the design process without explicitly doing design. And when I say the design process, I mean more the way designers approach problems than, like visual design aesthetic. Because when I hear a lot of people in the startup space say, we don't have designers or we can't do design, they're literally meaning like make it look pretty. Yeah. Which, I'm not degrading the importance of that, but there's so much more happening from a design as problem-solving mindset that can create bigger value for you than making it look pretty. Making it look pretty is nice and it has important things as well. I'm not diminishing it by any means. But a lot of the stuff I was describing around having this culture of collecting information, aligning around that information, and really building a culture of learning. Here, I'll end this whole thing by talking about my one biggest insight over doing startups and comparing it to my previous time at big companies and now my new time at big companies. Established companies and institutions get really good at doing. They are not very good at learning. A startup, by definition, can't do anything but learn. You don't know who your customers are. You don't know what your product will be. You don't know what features you should have. You don't know if you'll be able to ship those features. You don't know if anybody will care about those features. You don't know, how much you should charge for them, if you should charge for them. You know nothing. So the most important skill for a startup to have is learning. If you get good at learning and you get good at learning quicker, then you win, right? And all of this infatuation of startup culture and buying startups and big companies and wanting to run like a startup, I think is all around embodying that culture of learning because, frankly, big companies understand they get stagnant. They understand they can't move as fast. They understand they can't learn. And there's a lot of things that design processes and design methodologies can teach you about learning. Learning about your customers, learning about the stuff that I was talking about with onboarding, right? Learning about how to build a flow, learning how to humanize technology so it makes sense to people. So that's the stuff that I would focus on. I would take some stuff from talking to people and iterating, making decisions in this sort of informed kind of way, and make it part of your learning process as opposed to worrying so much about is it beautiful yet or not. Cool. Okay, thanks.